So I just want to do a quick recap of the last 2 weeks. Gary spoke very well about apocalypse and apocalyptic, and we get it in our society. We think apocalyptic is end times doom and gloom, like a movie, apocalyptic movie, or an apocalyptic event. And it doesn't mean that at all. We've lost the use of what it really means. And what it means is an unveiling. And last week, Mr. Loud, who shouts hallelujah, Peter Trousdale, was hiding behind that curtain. And Gary, when he spoke, went up and opened the curtain and unveiled Peter Trousdale, right? So he was there all the time. So apocalypse means an unveiling, something that was there all the time that then you see. And so who's hiding behind the curtain with reverence is Jesus, the Lamb on the throne. So he's there. He's the center of history. So the revelation of Jesus Christ, that's what the book's called, is the unveiling of this Lamb. And that's what it's actually really all about. So it's a letter that Jesus dictated to John, but it's like an audio-visual presentation. So I wonder, was John standing there and a hologram popped up in front of him, or did he go to heaven, whatever? But in chapter 1, it says he heard a voice and he turned. So I think he was in his right mind and he heard this voice. So he was in real time somehow, and Jesus put on this play for him with different acts. And it's not a crystal ball. It's not about things that are going to happen in the future and how we're going to escape what's going on in the world. There are terrible things going on in the world already. This book is about Jesus, the Lamb on the throne, who's the center of history, and how do we live in him and get his perspective and his glasses on life, and how do we see life, and how do we live at this time. So I'm going to talk to you about 3 things today. I'm going to talk about some of the concepts in Revelation, which Gary and Louise have covered some of them, and then I'm going to give you an outline of this book. So to make it very simple for you, so when you read it, it would take 90 minutes, as Gary said last week, if you were going to go and read the whole book, and you probably wouldn't, but I would suggest that you read maybe in your personal time a couple of chapters here and there. And I've got a whole lot of people in Life Group and all reading with us, and we've given them the books and the notes, and we're all reading together, and we're going over the information in Life Group. So we're all marinating in Revelation at the moment. But I'll give you a clear way to read the book. And a slide is going to come up, and I'm going to invite you all to take a picture of this slide, because if you've got this outline like a book, it's like the chapters of a book, then you'll understand what's going on and you will never get confused in the book of Revelation. And then at the end, I'm going to talk about symbols and imagery, and that's how we read this book. So I want to read this quote from Eugene Peterson. He died last year. He's the guy that wrote the Message Bible, or the Message interpretation of the Bible, if you wish. Gary also used a quote from him last week. He says, "I do not read the Revelation to get additional information about the life of faith in Christ. I've read it all before in the law and the prophet, in the gospel and the epistle. Everything in Revelation can be found in the previous 65 books of the Bible. The Revelation adds nothing of substance to what we already know. The truth of the gospel is already complete, revealed in Jesus Christ. There's nothing new to say on the subject. But there's a new way to say it. I read the Revelation not to get more information, but to revive my imagination." St. John uses words the way poets do, recombining them in fresh ways so that old truth is freshly perceived. He takes truth that has been eroded to platitude by endless usage and sets it in motion before us in an animated, impassioned dance of ideas. Now, if you've ever read anything in Revelation, it's an impassioned dance of ideas, all these colors and people and funny things going on. So the new way is imagery. That's what Revelation does. So it's an apocalyptic literature. Gary explained it last week, and he said you take your eyes and put them in your ears. So instead of seeing, we're going to hear. That's why the reading of the Word of God will help us. And it's meant to not offend you, but the vivid imagery is designed to go, wow. So now we feel it. So we've read everything about Jesus and the story of God with mankind in all the other 65 books of the Bible, but this book is going to make us feel it in a new way. So it's like watching a cartoon movie. You get a different feeling. So we're not exactly going to exposit Revelation. So expository preaching would be literally go line by line. So you could do that through Ephesians, Colossians, etc. But we're going to go chapter by chapter through the book and take all the ideas in each chapter and tell you all about them, all about all these funny characters, etc. But those funny characters and the wild colors and numbers, they aren't the main emphasis of the book. The main emphasis is the Lamb on the throne. So we'll tell you what they all mean, and there's different interpretations around the world, like many things, and we'll back up what we're saying and why we've chosen to go a particular route, and we'll let you know what it is. But remember, it's all about Jesus. That's what it's actually all about. And we've attached meaning to certain words, and we've made a big deal out of them, like the rapture, the 666, the 144,000, etc. So these are the players in the book, right? There's the 24 elders. Who are they? Then there's these living creatures with different faces. And then what is the significance of the 7 seals, the 7 trumpets, the 7 bowls? We'll go through all that as we go along. Then there's 2 beasts. There's a beast from the sea and a beast from the earth. And then there's a guy called the false prophet who looks like he might be the same guy as the one from the earth. Then there's the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. And we'll explain to you where they come from and who they are. And then there's the 2 witnesses. Are those people, or is it referring to something else? Then there's this word Antichrist. Is there an Antichrist, one specific person, or is it referring to the spirit of the age? And there probably have been some men that could have been Antichrist, like Stalin, Hitler, etc. And there could be one in each generation, but it's really the spirit of the age. And then the 666 thing. We get such a hang-up about it, and we think it's a little stamp on our hands, and it is not so. We'll explain it to you when we get there eventually. It's more like your soul gets caught in the mark of the world. And by the way, God has a mark on his people. That's what we need to remember, the Lamb on the throne. So he marks his people. If you've read, I think it's in Ephesians, it talks about the Holy Spirit, the seal of our guarantee. That's the mark of God. So 666, nothing. I've got the mark on me here, in my heart, in my head, in my soul. Then you get this Armageddon war, which is the never fought war. It doesn't actually take place per se. We'll explain it to you. Who are the 144,000? People say to me, are we in the end times yet? When's the tribulation coming? Friends, we've been in the end times since Jesus walked on the earth. And we're in tribulation since then. The age of the church is the age where the enemy tries to attack the people of God. Then there's this 1,000 years issue, which we'll get to, and then the Babylon harlot and the second coming, etc. So when you first read this book, it looks very obscure and bewildering, but we are going to make it clear for you as we go along as much as we can. And it's not about a rapture that just escapes the world. It's like, guys, we live in the world. How do we live effectively in this world and represent Christ well and fall in love with the Lamb? And will we follow the Lamb everywhere? That's what it's actually all about. I loved the Lion song, and I thought to myself, there's a scripture in the first section of the book where John goes to heaven, and Yahweh is standing there with a scroll, and it's got the 7 seals on it. And then John starts crying because there's no one worthy to open the scrolls. And he's crying and crying, and a big angel comes up to him and he says, "Don't worry, the Lion of the tribe of Judah has triumphed." And he turns, and I saw a little lamb that was slain, not a lion of the tribe of Judah. So what gives? The Lion of the tribe of Judah is his designation. It's his genealogy. So yes, the Lion of the tribe of Judah has triumphed, but the way of the Lamb is what Revelation is all about. So we don't overcome by the Lion of the tribe of Judah. We overcome by living the way of the Lamb. And we're going to teach you and show you and hopefully open your minds at what is Revelation talking about in terms of the unveiling of Jesus, and how should we be living in terms of this way of the Lamb. And then the symbols and the images are not about predicting the future. It's about shaping our perceptions of the present. So it's not about what do I need, what's going to happen, what's coming. It's not about that. It's about how do I live in the here and now. So apocalyptic literature has some unique features. So people are represented in the likeness of animals, like lambs and beasts, and Babylon harlot riding a red beast, a scarlet beast with 10 horns and 7 eyes. What does all this mean? It's a depiction. And then historical events are represented in the form of natural phenomena, so like fire and earthquake and floods. So when it talks about an earthquake, it may, there's different interpretations, but it may not be an actual earthquake. It's depicting something, and I'm going to show you symbols and imagery as we get there in a moment. And then colors and numbers have meaning. So the 2 witnesses, the 4 horsemen, the 4 living creatures, the 10 has a meaning. So 10 times 10 times 10 means something. And what's with this 144,000? Where does the number derive from? And Gary's going to explain all those numbers quite well quite soon. Then there's the 3.5 years and the 42 months and the 1,260 days. It's actually all the same thing. So 3.5 years is 1,260 days, and it is 42 months. And so they're linked. It's not necessarily referring to something specific. So we'll get to that. Now, Gary said last week that apocalyptic literature seeks to do two things. It seeks to take the present and set it in the light of the unseen realities of the future, and it seeks to take the present and set it in the unseen realities of the present. And the unseen reality of the present, guess what? The Lamb on the throne. Jesus, the Lamb on the throne. He's the reality of the present, and he's the reality of the future. And it depends where our eyes are focused. So if you've got your eyes focused in the wrong places, you're going to have fear and you're going to be afraid. And what this apocalyptic literature is trying to do is say, guys, there's a Lamb on the throne. He's in the center of history. He's in control of our lives. That's what it's all about. Right. So now we're going to go to these, the structure of the book to help you. You can take a picture of the slide, but it's the next slide, the one after this. I'm warning you. You can get your phones out if you like. And if you don't want to take a picture, everybody in my life group will get the slide. And if you want the slide, right at the end of my talk, there's a slide that says, guys, do you want to know more? And there's a QR code, and we'll happily send you the books we're reading. You can have the slide deck if you want. You can have anything you like. We'll share everything with you. So there's a prologue, and there's an epilogue at the end. So what we just read this morning was the prologue, chapter 1. And right at the end, chapter 22, 6 to 21 is the epilogue. And in the middle, there are 5 windows. It's like folders in your Dropbox folder, right? So the first one is chapter 1 to chapter 3. And then the second window is chapter 4 to chapter 11. The third window is 11 to 19, and so it goes, right? So now I'm going to explain to you how it works. So the first window is all about the Son of Man speaks to the 7 churches, and it's, what's that, 3 chapters, right? And now there's a key phrase, you'll see it at the bottom of each slide. I looked at a door standing open in heaven. So every time John refers to this, I looked and I saw a door open in heaven, it denotes a scene change. That's when we're moving to the next folder, right? So the first folder, and Gary will deal with this. Next weekend's the Kingdom Conference, right? Ian and I will be away. We've never gone away for our anniversary. It's our 30th anniversary tomorrow, in fact. And so we're going away. And by the way, Gary and Louise are not here because today's their anniversary and they are 1 year behind us. So they are 29. So they always go away for their anniversary. But I will catch up all the preachers. But after the Kingdom series, Gary will do another tie-up on the concepts of Revelation. And then we're going to go into the 7 churches. And according to our planning, it looks like 1 church per week. So that will be window 1. And then some other sub-stuff happens, and I'm going to explain that to you in a moment, but I just want you to get the 5 main windows and what the main theme of the window is, right? The Son of Man speaks to the 7 churches. I saw a door open in heaven, scene change. Next window, chapter 4 to chapter 11. Now we're talking 6 or 7 chapters. The Lamb unseals the scroll, and a whole lot of other things go down, and all these seals happen. So when you just read it, it's quite confusing. But if you remember which window you're in, you find. And then at the end of that, he makes a statement about I saw a door open in heaven, scene change, next window. So this open statement gives us these designations of these 5 folders. The cosmic conflict, which is window or folder 3, it's about the woman, the dragon, and the child. And then he makes a statement at the end of chapter 19. The temple of the tabernacle of testimony was opened, denotes a scene change into the next folder. And chapter 4, the 4th window, the 4th folder, the bowls of wrath and all sorts of funny things happened, and saw heaven open, final window. So that's a very good slide. So as we preach, and this is, by the way, courtesy of Louise. She's a graphic designer by profession, and she does most of the slides we do here, which are absolutely spectacular. So when she listens to this, thank you very much, Louise. So if you kept this on your phone in the gallery of your phone, as we go through Revelation in the next weeks and months, you can say, okay, which window am I in? And you'd know where we are, right? Now, sub-windows. So, for example, we're in window 1, chapters 1 to 3, the 7 letters to the 7 churches. So let me give you an example. I'm old-fashioned and I use Dropbox, but you might use iCloud. And you have folders. I'm going to give you an example that hopefully you'll never forget. So let's say I open my Dropbox and I go to, we're now in 2024, but I go to my 2023 folder and there's loads of folders, car payments, my house mortgage, etc. And I go to the medical aid folder and I open that one. Letter to the 7 churches. Then in the medical aid folder, I'll open, let's say, let me go back to October last year and see what bills were paid then. So I click, drop down, October 2023, and I go to that month. And then there's the physio, the dentist, the whatever, and I go drop down. See how many times did I go to the physio that month? Drop down. And that's exactly all it is. The 5 big windows, drop down menus underneath. So the next drop down in window 2, so now we'd get out of October and I'd go into December perhaps, next folder. There's a throne, a lamb, a scroll, and as you move through that window, which is 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 5 or 6 chapters, various things happen, but you're in that window. And at the end of that window, I saw a door heaven opened, the notes changed to the next thing. Okay? So it's relatively straightforward. And you'll see sub-act, then the 7th seal, and then the 2 witnesses are in there, and the trumpets roll out, a whole lot of other stuff happens. And so wherever we are in the months, just think to yourself, which folder are we in? Window 3, there's a woman, a child, and a dragon. There's this cosmic conflict. There's a war in heaven. And then the Lamb shows up on Mount Zion, and the 144,000 are singing a song of Moses, and we will tell you who they are and what it denotes and where they're at. And it's a sub-act in that folder. Then window 4, these 7 angels arrive with 7 bowls, and they start pouring out the wrath of God, and these vivid imagery and descriptions. And those aren't the main act. The main act is Jesus. So we'll explain all that other stuff. They're just supporting characters. And then there's a Babylon the harlot turns up with abomination of desolation or something tattooed on her forehead, and the 7 heads and 10 horns of this beast. And we get all hung up on what we've attached the meaning of something to a particular word. And these things are just side acts. They don't mean that much in our life. And again, still in window 4, this Babylon harlot in the sub-act, her eventual downfall. And it explains what happens to her and what the relevance is. And then window 5, a man on a horse, Jesus, arrives on a horse with tattooed on his thigh, King of Kings and Lord of Lords. And a whole lot of stuff goes down in this folder, all little sub-acts. There's this Armageddon, never-fought war that happens. And then right at the end, the holy city, the bride descending from God. So in terms of predictions, I would say the first 21 chapters got no predictions in it. It's explaining world history for us in terms of God's perspective. The only prediction is that there is a new heavens and a new earth. And, we've always thought of heaven. And so, since I've been reading Revelation and studying it since about April last year, I've become so impassioned and excited about eternity. But I'm careful what I say to God. I don't say, I can't wait, Lord, because I can wait. I'm enjoying living. What I say is I'm looking forward to. And I'm really looking forward to see what God's got in store for us. And that's really the only prediction there is. So if you can remember which window you're in, and I hope that made it relatively simple, and I would suggest that you get 1 or 2 of those slides so that you can remember all the time where you are. You won't get lost. It's like a map. And it's just sub-acts with that word open. I saw a door open in heaven denoting the change of folders. Now, to move onwards, Revelation is not specifically chronological. So it's what John saw, not what happened next. So we mustn't say, does that happen next? No, that's just what John saw next. And I'll explain to you in a moment what I mean. And if you remember what Gary talked about last week, he talked about chiasm and chiastic. It was like a flock of geese flying with a V inverted here. Remember, you had that flock of geese slide? So we read like this on a book, but in Middle East, they write and read and think chiastically. So at the beginning, down to here, and then the main act is at the V, and then it goes out like that. That's why chapter 12 of the book of Revelation is actually the center of the book. So, for example, the woman, the dragon, the child, it's in chapter 12, and there's a famous verse that you all know, Revelation 12, verse 11. It says, they overcame by the blood of the Lamb and the word of their testimony, and they loved not their lives unto death. So the center of the book is the woman, the dragon, the child. But we think it's 12 chapters in, so surely it's going to start happening. So what do you think the woman, the dragon, and the child is? Jesus' birth, right? And the dragon's waiting for the coming of the Christ, and then he wants to kill the Christ and the Christ's people, us, the believers. And then it says that the woman gave birth to the child, right? And the woman and the dragon, by the way, are signs. There wasn't a real woman in the cosmic heavens giving birth to a child, but the child is real. The child is not a sign. The child is real. So the dragon gets cast down, and the woman, it says, was taken away, protected on the wings of eagles into the wilderness. So now there are two schools of thought, not to confuse everybody, but there's a school of thought that the book of Revelation is literal, and there's literal this and literal that, or that it's all symbolism. And I'll show you in a moment with references to the Old Testament that is kind of the view that Lifehouse is taking, following many theologians, although there are just as many on the other side. I was talking to somebody earlier on about cholesterol and statins, and we had a little giggle together because I don't believe in the fact that cholesterol is dangerous or take statins, and the other person doesn't. But she said, but there's so many doctors and professors, and I read out thousands of other doctors and professors on the other side. So for example, the Eagle is not a B-52 bomber that arrives and takes the church to the rapture, to Jordan, to Petra, you know. When John wrote that, he meant it's an eagle. And as Louise said 2 weeks ago when they did that little interview, that the book was written in a context to the people of that time. It wasn't written forward to us. So John didn't see something he couldn't understand. He saw an eagle with wings. And it's a reference to Exodus, where God said to the Israelites, I will rescue you, my people, on the wings of an eagle. So did they get out of Egypt on the wings of an eagle? No, on foot, 40 years through the desert. So the wings of an eagle was a symbol. So when John mentioned that in Revelation, his imagination is steeped in Old Testament theology and thinking and imagery and symbols, and he understood that, and his readers would have understood it too. It's just us that have lost our way as we went along. So the backstory of Revelation is the Old Testament. As Eugene Peterson said in that quote, everything is contained in the previous 65 books of the Bible. It's just retaking everything, saying it in a new way, in an apocalyptic literature, an unveiling literature that punches at you in a different way. And I'll explain that also in a moment. So there's many, they say between 500 and 600 different allusions to the Old Testament in Revelation. And I read a theologian this week, and he really scared me. He said, it's so layered that on your first reading of Revelation, or your 7th reading, or your 70th reading, you'll still be gaining. You'll go, never saw that. Never saw that. All the little imagery and the double allusions, etc., to stuff in the Old Testament. That's why it's so good for us to know what the Old Testament says as we go along. And the whole reason that it's so punchy is it's trying to get to our imagination. We finished with intellect. We want to hear and feel. We want to feel the doof of what this imagery does for us. So I'm going to give you an example using some political cartoons. So the first one was about 25 years ago when Bill Clinton was a naughty boy president, and he was a Democrat, and the Republicans wanted to impeach him. And at that time, that elephant with a noose appeared in the newspapers in America and all over the world. And everybody knew what that meant. Ha ha, the Republicans want to impeach the Democratic president. But you wouldn't expect to fly. Am I still on? I feel it feels funny. You wouldn't expect to fly to the White House and see an elephant, real or, like a sculptured one with a noose. It was referring to something. So the symbol was pointing to something. The second one, this was also a decade or two ago, but you know exactly what that means. The American flag unraveling, what do you think? You think fiber of society, moral fiber of society unraveling. America's unraveling. The West is unraveling. You wouldn't expect to fly to New York City and in Central Park see a big flag. Must be real, must be literal. It's pointing to something. And if you lived in that time, in your context, you would understand what that meant exactly. So John's people, I better stop fiddling with it, eh? John's people understood exactly what he was referring to all the time as well. And this is my favorite. This is 1997. The Brits were giving Hong Kong back to China. If you saw that, you'd understand it. This big dragon, China's going to swallow up Hong Kong. Everybody around the world was laughing and going, yeah, we know exactly what that means. I know what that refers to. Wings of eagles, yeah, it's Exodus. God's going to deliver his people. I know exactly what it's referring to. And the whole of the Old Testament is full of Leviathan and the beasts, etc. But because we're not steeped in Old Testament imagination, we look at Revelation and we go, no, it must be literal. Not necessarily so. So when John spoke about various things, the people of the time would know exactly what was happening. So it's not a literal book and it's not an allegory. It's literally symbols that point to something else. And John described the symbols, not what they meant. So he didn't tell us what they meant. He just described the symbols. And he assumed that the people of that time, remember that this letter was sent to the 7 churches, circular churches, and like all the other letters in the Bible, all the other churches in the whole region, it was meant to be read out. So somebody would stand and read this letter. And as the words of Revelation washed over them, like what we read this morning and like what Anthony read, it would evoke something in their imagination and they would feel what was going on in their lives and they would understand that there's a lamb on the throne. So these people and animals and natural phenomenon, which we think are natural phenomena, don't really exist in those wild costume forms. They point to something else. But what John was really trying to do, and it's what Jesus was really trying to do, was point to the Lamb on the throne. So this is the unveiling of Jesus, written by Jesus, from Jesus, about Jesus, all about him. You know what? Can somebody just stick this thing? Come here, Ian, and just stick it for me again. I might have moved a little bit. I think the youngster that put it on me didn't want to touch me on my studio, so he stuck it as best as he could. You see, that's a symbol. See, everybody over 25 or 30 is laughing because they know what that means. Touch me on my studio. And anybody who doesn't understand is a millennial under 25. Remember, if your drain is being naughty, phone 4440 or something. Remember? Now, some of you will look at me blankly like you have no idea what I'm talking about. I see Bianca laughing at me because we're older. It's our context. We understand the reference. If your drain is being naughty, phone 4440 or whatever. But everybody else is like, Dylan's going, tell me about slap food. And I haven't a clue what he's talking about because he's not even a millennial. He's a newbie, the younger version of something. Now we're going to get to the crux of this in closing. Imagery, symbols designed to evoke something in our emotions, and then our emotions will inform our intellect. Now, if you remember, in the first chapter that was read out aloud to us, Jesus says, I'm the Alpha and Omega, the first and the last. And in chapter 22, he says it again. But I want to tell you what that means. Alpha, the Greek word is arche, archetype. And what it means is the beginning, the first of a series, but also the source. So Jesus is saying, I'm the Alpha, I'm the source of everything. So he was with the Father before the foundation of the world. He's the archetype, the first in a series. And the question is, are our lives hidden in him? Is he the beginning of your life? Is he the everything that goes on in your life? It makes me think of Colossians 1 where it says everything holds together in him. So it's all about him. And then I'm the Omega. In Greek, it's a word called telos, and it means the inherent destiny of a thing. So the destiny of what? He's the end. If you read the book of Revelation, you'll see. But does he bookend your life like he bookends history, the beginning and the end of your life? So the telos of an acorn is an oak tree. The inherent destiny of a little acorn is to become an oak tree. And that's where our lives are going. Our lives are held together in him. And it's all about him. And now the problem, friends, is that we don't want to follow the Christ. Many of us. And even those of us who believe, even the demons believe and they tremble, right? So we go through seasons in our life where we believe, but we're not actually following the Lamb. There's a wonderful scripture somewhere later on in about chapter 15, and it talks about they followed the Lamb everywhere. And I think that's such a beautiful picture. And it talks about the virgins, okay? I don't know if you've ever been confused about the virgins. We're going to get to that. And it's about having a purified heart. It doesn't mean that there were a whole lot of Jewish evangelists that became the 144,000 and they were the virgins. Or it doesn't mean that. It means that we circumcise our hearts and we follow the Lamb everywhere. So even if you're in difficult situations in your life right now, it doesn't mean that you're not following the Lamb. It just means that life happens, right? For us to make sense of life, of the anguish of life, of the pain of life, we have to understand who Jesus is. And as Gary said last week, we sometimes feel like we're marginalized, that the church is nothing. But Microsoft and Google and Apple, they are not the center of the universe. Jesus, the Christ, Yeshua HaMashiach, he is the Lamb on the throne, and he rules and reigns. He isn't going to become king, friends. He is king already, and he was king from that very first night when he was born. So chapter 12 of Revelation is actually a Christmas Eve text. So what John sees next is not what happens next. So for example, right at the end, do you know this millennium thing? There's about 3 verses on it in chapter 21 or 22. But there's some funny little verses that says, and I saw a dragon cast down for 1,000 years, and then this and this and this happens. And we build a whole story about the millennial kingdom on this. But what happens next, what he sees next doesn't necessarily happen next. So at the end, when I saw a dragon cast down, when do you think that took place? Christmas Eve. When Jesus was born, the devil knew he was tickets. That's why, was it Herod that wanted to kill all the boys under 2 years old? And God took the woman and the child, and Jesus did go into the wilderness, remember, the desert place for 1,260 days. It's a time. So do you know that there are 42 stages of the Israelites' journey in the desert? 42 stages over the 40 years. So there's 42 months, which equals 1,260 days, which equals 3.5 years, is a symbolic time frame that it takes for God to deliver his people through a particular season. So at the end, the dragon cast down is referring to when the devil got cast down, the dragon, when Jesus was born. So it's all a matter of how we see this thing and how we position it. And if we stay in the 5 windows, we'll understand where we are. And as we unpack it in the months to come, you will see what all these things mean. And hopefully you'll start getting a picture. When I first started reading it, I had all these pictures moving in my head. It was like going to the fun fair. You know, they had those roundabout things with the horses that used to go up and down like this. And all these horses were going up and down in my mind, you know. And after a while, because I read enough and I prayed enough, it's taken me a couple of months, all the dancing horses went quiet. And I put them over there, and I've worked with them as I go along, and the Lamb on the throne came up. Every time I worship now, I just feel this Lamb on the throne coming out of me. And that's what it's all about. So while we're talking about the Lamb on the throne, this is something else that we're going to talk about all the time for months. Team Dragon, Team Lamb. There's only 2 choices. There's the world system or the kingdom system. And what we're going to do as we go along is we're going to hopefully help us all. Yeah, we'll deal with the fancy characters and all the colors and the moving horses, etc. What does it look like to be Team Dragon, and what does it look like to be Team Lamb? And hopefully encourage all of us to find out what it really means to serve Jesus the Christ, because that's really what it's all about. And Gary also spoke about 2 commands in the book of Revelation. Look, comes up all the time, look, and do not be afraid. And the way you obey the second is by obeying the first. So the way you are not afraid is because you look. John was in the Spirit on the Lord's day. I'm basing my life on that daily, that every day of my life may I be in the Spirit, because if I'm not in the Spirit, I'm not going to hear his voice. And the minute I take my eyes off of him and I read what goes on in Gaza or South Africa or Johannesburg because the municipal thing's failing, then my heart fails me. So every day I go and refresh myself with Jesus. And that's what it's all about. So when you put Jesus at the center of history and the center of life, you will not be afraid. So maybe you here today and you don't know Jesus. And you've been thinking, that's why you're here. Somebody brought you, or you've come for a while, or maybe you've been churched at some point in your life, but you don't really know the Lamb. And I think salvation's a progression, you know. And we often do something called an altar call, and we ask you to stick your hands up. I'm not going to do it. If you want to know more about Jesus and you want to become Team Lamb, I'll ask you afterwards to come up. Mark, who's sitting in the front here with the shirt on, and Ian will stand over here. And if you want to just talk to somebody, today may be the day that you're going to go, you know what, I'm going to follow the Christ from today. I'm going to go Team Lamb. But maybe you've just got some questions and you're not sure and you're not there yet. That's fine. No pressure. You can come and chat to them. They're like prayer counselors, and they'll talk you through it. And then also, as we close, maybe you're afraid and you haven't been looking properly. That's why we teach so much in this church about spiritual practices, because there's no real power in them, reading the word, having devotions, coming to church. But the point is that they get you in a position where you can be in the Spirit on the Lord's day. So if you're afraid and you haven't been looking and you just want somebody to pray with you, you've just got some dilemmas in your life, you'd like some spiritual wisdom and discernment, there's a whole host of leaders in the front here. You can also come up here afterwards when we close, and somebody will have a chat with you. That's how you get Jesus to be your beginning and your end. So the book of Revelation was written for two kinds of people. The ones that follow the Lamb, but they keep taking their eyes off of him and they lose their focus and they're not sure what's going on. And then there's the other people that just go with the flow of culture. They don't even know there's a lamb. They don't even understand that there's a dragon. They just agree with everything that culture says. And the book is written for those two kinds of people. And those are the people that I've just addressed. So if you don't know Jesus and you want to know him, and today's your day, or you just want to chat through some issues, come and stand here with Mark and Ian, and they'll chat to you afterwards. You're the guys that go with the flow of culture. But let me tell you, Jesus is the center of the universe. He's the Alpha and Omega. He's the archetype, and he's the telos. He's the inherent destiny of all of our lives. And as a believer, he is that already, but you may not know that. Do you know that we're becoming who we already are? And Ian and I were talking about the 3 tenses of salvation, and you've heard it before from this pulpit, and we get confused, and we think it means that I'm not saved anymore or whatever. We have been saved from the penalty of sin. Come to Christ, you won't see the second death, Vanessa. We are being saved from the power of sin, and we will be saved from the presence of sin. So we in the middle here, we are being saved from the power of sin in our daily lives. And I don't know about you, but me and I, every day self raises its head. Every day I have to bow my knee. We sang that song. Every day I have to say, I choose you, Jesus. Find me grateful, find me thankful, find me on my knees, how the song goes, you know. So those kind of people, if you just need some help and you need to refocus your life, you can come and join us as well.